An elderly woman falls in the street. A group of monks rush over to help and they start laughing. If you saw that, what would you think? Because your answer says more about your culture than theirs. If you've ever worried about doing the wrong thing when you travel or misreading a moment in a culture, make sure you're subscribed because this is one of those conversations that just might change how you see the world and yourself. Travel doesn't just show you new places, it shows you yourself, but not in the way you expect. It holds up a mirror, not to your appearance, but to your assumptions, because culture is like water. You don't notice it when you're in it, but the second you step into a different current, you feel everything. We are all conditioned in how we communicate, how we handle conflict, how we express emotion, what we think is polite, and what we think is rude. And the wild part is that those definitions are not universal, they're local. And this is something that really came into focus during a recent conversation I had with a guest. We were talking about how culture shapes behavior, often in ways we don't even realize until we're standing right up in the middle of it. And she shared a perspective that honestly stopped me for a second because it challenged something so instinctive, something most of us would never question. Take a listen to this.
If you look at how people approach disagreements and confrontation, this is handled very differently culture by culture. For example, in Thailand, in many Buddhist countries, showing impatience is the rudest thing you can do. And you go to Eastern Europe, that is not the case. It is not considered rude to show impatience. And so I think a lot of people are surprised by reactions. And if you're in Thailand and you're with a bunch of Buddhist monks that own nothing but an orange robe and do nothing but meditate all day and do good things for people, the way they approach what we might see as, I'll just say it with an example because it's easier. Let's say an elderly woman is crossing the street and falls. My natural reaction here would be to run over. Oh my goodness, let me help get you back up. A Buddhist monk will run over. They're not really supposed to help, although in this situation, you're not supposed to touch people of the opposite sex if you're a Thai Buddhist monk. But they would help in this situation. But they would laugh because they've been conditioned not to show a negative emotion. And if you don't know that going into it, you might think, well, gosh, that's rude. But their philosophy is very different. It's about kind of spreading joy and not negativity, and that you'd still go over and help them, but you would be laughing and as you got them up. So there are surprises like that in every country in terms of how they approach situations. But if you don't know the reason behind it, it might seem rude or weird or odd. And in a similar vein, the reason that a Thai Buddhist monk is not supposed to touch someone of the opposite sex is not because they're considered better or above or superior. It's because their whole philosophy is to avoid suffering. And for their philosophy is, where does suffering come from? It's if you are attached to something or someone and something happens to them, that is the greatest pain. So imagine if you are a parent and has a child and something happens to the child, that's the greatest pain. So a way of avoiding that is not having children. Doesn't mean they don't love children. So a way of avoiding, hey, if you have if I'm married to a man and something happens to that man, then I've caused suffering for myself. So a way of avoiding it is not getting married, just serving society. So you might hear, don't touch someone of the opposite sex, even on the shoulder, as, hey, it's sexist. Whoa, hold on, back up. Let's look at why that's there, just to understand it. You don't have to agree with it, just to learn. Wow. So a lot of surprises in that area, I think.
Yeah. And that right there, that's the moment. Because if you didn't know the context behind that, you might walk away from that situation thinking that was rude or that was inappropriate. That didn't feel right. But what you're actually seeing is a completely different philosophy in action. It's not about ignoring the situation. It's not about a lack of care. It's about how care is expressed and how emotion is managed and how meaning is assigned. Because in that moment, they're not reacting the way we would. They're responding the way they've been taught. And this is where travel really starts to stretch you because it asks you to do something that's not always comfortable. It asks you to pause your judgment long enough to understand before you decide. And this shows up in smaller everyday ways too. In the US, we value personal space. In places like Italy or Spain, people may stand closer, speak with much more animation. It's connection for them, not intrusion. In Germany or Switzerland, being exactly on time is a sign of respect. In parts of Latin America and parts of Europe, time is more fluid. Relationships matter more than the clock. In Japan, tipping can actually feel awkward or even inappropriate. But here in the US, it's expected. Same actions, completely different meanings. And this shows up in ways that can feel really personal too, especially when it comes to customer service. Because if you've ever been to Spain or honestly, even other parts of Europe, you may have had a moment where you walked into a store and no one greeted you. There was no smile, no hi, how are you? In fact, sometimes the person working there will keep doing exactly what they're doing, finishing a task, organizing something, maybe even turning their back to you for a moment. And if you're coming from the US, that can feel uncomfortable, even a little rude, because here we're used to something very different. We're used to being acknowledged immediately, smiled at, welcomed in. There's an expectation that the customer experience starts the second you walk through the door. But in Spain, it's just different. Customer service is more matter of fact, less about performance, less about projecting emotion, and more about simply completing the interaction when it's time. And here's where it gets interesting. It's not that they're being dismissive. It's not that they don't care. It's that the expectation is different. There isn't the same cultural pressure to perform friendliness. So what feels warm and welcoming to us can feel unnecessary or even insincere to someone else. And I actually saw this from the other side too. I had a friend from Spain come visit me here in the United States, and one of the things that stood out to her the most was customer service. She was genuinely impressed by how quickly people greeted her and how friendly they were, how attentive everything felt. Because to her, that level of engagement wasn't normal. It felt elevated and intentional. And that's when it really clicked for me. The same experience I might take for granted here felt exceptional to her. So it's the same behavior with a different baseline, a different expectation, a different meaning. And I had a moment like this myself in Spain too, not with customer service, but with something even simpler, just a gesture. I was talking with a store employee, just having a normal conversation, and as we wrapped up, he made a hand gesture. And to me, it looked exactly like the gesture we use in the US to say, "Come here." So naturally, I started walking back toward him, thinking maybe he had one more thing to say, or maybe he forgot something. But then I paused because something felt off. And in that split second, I realized he wasn't calling me back. He was just saying goodbye. It's the same gesture, but completely different meaning. And if I hadn't caught that, I would have walked right back into a moment that didn't exist. That's the thing about culture. It's not just language, it's behavior, it's body language, and it's tone and timing. And most of it is unspoken. So when we travel, we're not just learning new places, we're learning new systems. And this is why guided experiences matter. This right here, this is why I always say travel isn't just about where you go. It's about how you experience it, because you can walk into a place like Spain and figure things out as you go. But when you have context, when you have someone explaining the why behind what you're seeing, everything changes. And that's exactly why I love recommending curated experiences when I travel. Whether it's a local guide walking you through a neighborhood, a cultural tour that explains traditions you might otherwise miss, or even something as simple as a food tour where you learn why things are done a certain way. Those are the moments that take you from just visiting to actually understanding. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I don't want to just see a place, I want to get it, I've linked some of my favorite curated tours in the description below for you to explore. And just so you know, some of these links are affiliate links, which simply means I may earn a small commission if you decide to book at no extra cost to you. But I only recommend experiences that truly enhance your trip and help you connect more deeply with the destination. Because at the end of the day, the more you understand the culture around you, the more meaningful your travel becomes. Every culture is like its own operating system, and if you try to run your home programming in a completely different system, you're going to hit friction. But when you pause, when you get curious instead of reactive, that's when everything opens up. So the next time something feels rude, strange, or uncomfortable when you travel, pause before you label it. And instead of asking, why would they do that? Try asking, what does this mean here? That one question can change your entire experience. And I want to invite you into this for a moment. Think about this. Have you ever had a moment while traveling or even at home when something felt off, but later you realized you just didn't understand it yet? What assumptions were you bringing into that moment? And what shifted once you saw it differently? Because that right there, that's where growth happens. That story with the monks, it's powerful, not because of what they did, but because of how easy it is to misunderstand something when we don't know the context behind it. And travel will give you those moments again and again, moments where you realize the world isn't wrong, it's just different. If this episode made you think a little differently, make sure you're subscribed to Cheryl's Travel Blueprint, because we're not just talking about where to go, we're talking about how travel changes you. And if you're ready for that kind of journey, I'll meet you in the next episode.